if you want to be a teacher and you want to teach English language as well, by no means your job is easy. If you really want your learner to help out to develop their language skill. So today we are going to have another important professional activity which is referred as the evaluation of ELT materials. By no means a teacher can conduct a class of developing English language without a material. By any means, he or she introduces a material to develop his or her learner's language skill. In this particular video, we will be focusing on the evaluation of ELT materials. We will try to know what do we understand by the evaluation of ELT materials. We will also look at why a teacher should evaluate an ELT material, and of course we will look at the process of evaluating ELT materials and what are the things we will be evaluating in an ELT material. So this is Muhammad Nasim Firdaus, and I am here to narrate this PowerPoint presentation, and I developed this slide with the help from McDonald, Shaw and Mashura and other different sources. And I would like to welcome you from core of my heart to have proper concentration in here, because whenever you will be moving to your classroom and you will have your material for your learners, if you know this before starting your class, you will be able to adapt your material in a very suitable way which will be beneficial for your learners. So let's start with the contents. What will we have today? So these are our major concerns: the reasons for evaluation, the external evaluation, the internal evaluation, and the overall evaluation. Of course, we will be looking at the material evaluation in the very first slide. So material evaluation is a procedure that involves measuring the value of a set of learning materials. So whenever we are referring value, we are referring a potential value. And this was developed by Tomlinson 2003. So we are referring a procedure, and by that procedure we will be measuring the value of a set of learning materials. So for example, for this particular course, that is methods and materials, I have suggested you McDonough and Shaw and Mashura as your course book or your supplementary book. So if I want to evaluate a material, though it is not an ELT material, but as a material, if I want to evaluate it, I will be involving measuring the value of a set of learning materials. So that will be I will be evaluating with lots of variables, and what will be the variables will be referred later. So the context of evaluation. So why do we need to evaluate? So first of all, we need to highlight teaching situations. So what are the situations available in our teaching environment? Usually we have two different situations. One is when we will have open market materials, and another one when we will have the materials which are produced by Ministry of Education or some similar body in different countries. So whenever we will have open market materials, that means teachers might be able to choose from the large amount of choice as from the market, existing market. Maybe they will be choosing from the existing materials in the market. But whenever they will have the materials which are produced by Ministry of Education, they might not have choice. Rather than that involves teachers in an understanding of why the materials have been written in such a way and how they can make effective use of them in the classroom. So they will be looking at two issues. First, why they are written in such a way, the way it was written. I'm talking about the materials. And second one is how can the teachers make it effective in the classroom. So those will be the situations, teaching situations. So material evaluation will give the teachers insight to help them follow the evolution in the field while following the coursebook from the ministry, which is very limiting. You know that as the government body or the ministry, education ministry, uh, develop the book, and as a teacher you need to follow that one. So if you evaluate the material before joining the classroom or introducing uh, that particular material in the classroom, it will help you to look at insight and follow the evaluation, and that means it will help you to adapt because of the limitation, because it is very limiting, because it has been produced in a very generalized way. The evaluation of kind materials therefore merits serious consideration, as an inappropriate choice may waste funds, time, and demotivating effect. So, for example, if you have a material and if you do not evaluate that, that means there is a possibility that it may be an inappropriate choice, and if it becomes an inappropriate choice, then it will waste funds definitely, and the time, and it will be demotivating for the students, and possibly in some situations the teacher will be demotivated as well. The selection of a good textbook can be valuable, particularly in contexts where the assimilation of stimulating authentic materials can be difficult to organize. So we are talking about selecting a good textbook, and in order to consider it as a good material or good textbook for your learners in your classroom, definitely you need to evaluate in some considerations, and that consideration might be to stimulating authentic materials, and can be uh, uh, which might be difficult to organize. So we are talking about the value of the choice, and whenever we do not have the choice, we will be talking about adapting, and nothing can be uh, I mean nothing can be considered. I mean, uh, if you do not evaluate the materials, you might face some challenges in your classroom for teaching new learners. So what are the types of material evaluation? So how many types are there? So we are focusing on the three major types of evaluation. Number one is pre-use evaluation, post-use evaluation, and post-use evaluation. So pre-use evaluation involves making predictions about the potential value. So before you introduce it, so that is the time when you are referring that. So we are talking about the potential value, as you do not know whether how further or how far it might be valuable for your learners. And qualitative evaluation, that means during introducing the material in your classroom. And post-use evaluation, when you have already introduced and now you want to measure the effects on the users. That is the time we do the evaluation, which is referred or known as post-use evaluation. So the evaluation process, so we mainly evaluate a material from external perspective and internal perspective. So both of the evaluation will help us to understand the value of the material. And here is the uh, model or figure or diagram about the process of material evaluation. First one, we can see that macro evaluation and micro evaluation, and we refer or we consider external as macro evaluation and internal as micro evaluation. And whenever we will have macro evaluation, and we will be referring as inappropriate or potential appropriate, and then we exit or we go further. But in micro evaluation, we go inappropriate or appropriate, whether the material is inappropriate or appropriate. And if it is inappropriate, then we'll exit. If it is appropriate, we will adopt or select. Okay, so uh, that is how we will evaluate a material. So the first one is external evaluation. So we'll be evaluating externally, and whenever we're evaluating externally, the evaluators will ask these questions. So what the materials contain, what the what they aim to achieve, and what they ask learners to do. So these are the questions we will be asking to the material. As an evaluator, you will be asking these questions to the material, and you will try to answer. The material will give you the answer. What are the contents in there, and what is the aim the material is set for the achievement, and the role of the learners. And of course, it is referred by Tomlinson. So these are the processes. First, we will be looking at the intended audience. So we will look at the target audience. Who are the target audience for the material? So we need to evaluate that. We need to ascertain that who are the target audience for the material. And then the proficiency level of the students, whether the learners are proficient or not, whether the learners are low intermediate or upper intermediate. We need to uh, focus, we need to observe the proficiency level. So, and of course, we also need to look at whether the claim of the material resembles with the difficulties. For example, the book says, the material says that it is for the low intermediate. Then we have to judge whether the learners from low intermediate can and adapt, can understand from that material or not. So whenever we will be evaluating externally rather than inside, we will be evaluating from the outer perspective, from the outer row, from the surface level. The context of material use. We need to establish whether the materials are for English for general use or English for specific purposes. So definitely we know that based on the context, the materials can be changed. Materials can be differently organized. So, if we want to establish, that means whether the material are for English for general use or English for specific purposes, we need to evaluate that. The presentation of language and the organization of units. You know that the books, the English language grammar books or other books, or maybe skills development books, they have different chapters, different units and organized. So we need to look at the organization of those units and lengths. We need to focus on the length, we need to focus on the order, and of course we need to focus on the deliver plan, how those units, those chapter, those learning outcomes can be delivered. And the author's view on language and learning. So we need to look at uh, this can be different. Like uh, the teacher might not be author, we know that. So that is two perspective before it goes to the classroom. First one is the author's view, and second one is the teacher's view. So we need to know that whether it resembles or not, whether there is a connection between author's view and the language and learning. So we will be focusing whether the author's view about language learning and how those views are reflected in the units or lessons. So what is the focus the author targeted for the intended audience. And the next one is the usability of materials. So that is plain and simple. So the evaluator looks at the cost of the material and the use of the materials as co-courses or as supplementary courses. First, the uh, the evaluator will look at whether it is cost effective or not, and second, the evaluator will look at or consider it whether it can be a core course for the learners, or it just uh, has the ability to be only a supplementary course. So that will be an evaluation. And the availability of teacher's book. I don't know whether you are familiar with this particular phrase, that is teacher's book. Teacher's book is a book which is referred as the guide for the teachers, or we can say one kind of manual to operate the book. So that manual book, that operational manual from the perspective of a teacher, whether it is available or not. So if it is not available for teachers, so it might be uh, 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 difficult for the teachers to carry on or to work with the student edition. And then availability of vocabulary list or index. So most of your books which are considered as global course books, which I referred in this particular course, so you will find that they will have the vocabulary list and index. So this actually helps the learners to go through or to understand the things, because whenever there is a list of the vocabularies or the index, the learners can go through or go forth, and of course the teacher can also do that to have better understanding on any topic. And the purpose of visual materials. So uh, definitely the visual materials are better. You know that during whenever we had the uh, content of developing ELT materials, you know that the visual material can help the learners, and it is worth examining if the visual material serves any learning purposes as well. So not only we have to produce or introduce the visual materials, but also we need to evaluate whether they are beneficial or not. And the criteria of layout and presentation. um, it, I know some of you might not agree with this particular point, because you might say that uh, layout and presentation may be better for the younger learners, but I do believe that clarity is needed for the layout and presentation, because sometimes it might feel boring to carry on. even if you are an adult learner. Because some textbooks are researched and written well, but are so cluttered with information on every page that the teachers or learners find them practically unusable. So lots of information in there that is, which is not eye-catching or eye-soothing. It seems very difficult, and it seems very hazardous sometimes, and it will, you know, kill you interest, kill your motivation to carry on, to read the next chapter. So that's why it is needed to have a proper layout and presentation. Sometimes I instruct my learners, so before their examination, to make it a clear one. You know, uh, proper spaces, margins, and the presentation should be clear. Even for the presentation, I do tell my students to make the presentation a neat and clean one, because it helps me to generate my interest to carry on. So if it is very assiduous, if it feels as a very, you know, gathering, then and I feel less interested to comprehend what is in there. Cultural biasness, of course, we need to know whether it is culturally biased or not, because if it is culturally biased, then you might not the, I might not bring all your learners in a same umbrella, under a same umbrella. So it will be very difficult for you. Representation of minority groups, of course, it will look at whether how the minority groups are represented. So of course it is one kind of biasness that it is trying to identify based on the learner's gender, class, race, nationality, and ethnicity. If any way it is biased from this perspective, so definitely you need to choose different material, and if you do not have that scope, then you need to adapt. Yes, you need to adapt. The justification of digital material, whenever we are referring digital material, we are referring the audio visual materials, or audio materials or video materials. For example, this particular slide can be considered as a video material. So sometimes some books carry or provide or supplies some audio materials or video materials, maybe some links, maybe some CDs. So we need to look at two things. First, the cost, whether after adding the audiovisual materials or video materials, as it is the cost of the material can be raised. So we need to look at that. And second thing is that whether there is any connection between those audio and visual video materials and the pedagogic use, whether it is useful in teaching or not. The inclusion of tests, uh, I know some might not identify this, but definitely you need to identify. First of all, for example, if you consider this particular course and the evaluation processes, then you need to understand the inclusion, and I mean, whether there is proper resemblance between the learning outcomes or the topics and what are we testing. So if we do not find any resemblance in there, so it might make the learners confused uh, about what they are learning and uh, what is represented in a material. So this might clash. So which will not be a better position, better environment for a teacher to carry on learning in an ELT classroom. So uh, another is that uh, so it will be an internal evaluation. uh, we have done that, but we'll be looking at the next slide then. That is internal evaluation. And whenever we are referring to analyze a material internally, we are looking at or considering the external evaluation stage match up with the internal consistency or not, organization of the materials match up as stated by the author, or publisher or not. So we will be looking at two issues to match up. First one is matching with the external and internal, and second one is the organization with the author or publisher or not, and that of course referred by McDonough, Shaw and Masura. So whenever we are referring internal evaluation, so we are referring, first one is the presentation of the skills. So how the skills are presented, I mean, and you have some skills to introduce for your learners. So how their proportions, their appropriateness in a particular teaching scenario is presented. And then we'll be looking at the grading and sequencing of materials. So we'll be looking at how they are graded, or how the materials are sequenced. Some materials are graded in the progression of difficulty, that is from least difficulty to most difficult. Yes, some materials claim to be modular by grouping a set of units at approximately the same level. So first we should look at whether it is graded or not in the progression of difficulty, so whether it is difficult or not. So from the least difficult to most difficult one, so we need to look at. Second is that we need to identify whether some materials claim to be modular by grouping a set of units at approximately the same level. So whether it is in the same level or they are gradually developing the difficulty level or not. And then reading or discourse skill. So we need to look at whether there is sufficient amount of text beyond the sentence, whether it can be understandable whenever we'll be looking from the perspective of reading or discourse skill. And then listening skill, so we need to look at the categories of recordings, whether the listening materials are authentic or not, or whether they are just an artificial one, and it was made and prepared, and they lack the authenticity. And incorporation of speaking materials, whether there is presence of real interaction or not, or the dialogues are presented there or included there are artificial. We need to evaluate that particular one. The relationship of test and exercises, that what we talked about in the external evaluation as well. So we need to know whether it meets the learner needs. I mean, if the learner wants to develop his or her speaking skill, so we need to identify whether the material has the ability to meet the learner needs or not. And of course, we need to look at the resemblance with learning from the course material. So we need to look at the learning and the course material, whether there is a connection or not. So definitely will not recommend it if there is no connection. And supporting different learning styles. So yes, we already know that the learners are different, the way of their learning, the ways of the learning are different as well. So we need to look at whether the material has the provision for self-study, and of course we also need to look at whether the claim is justified or not, whether uh, whether they have the scope of self-study, whether the learner can learn from their angle or not. And another one is engaging to motivate both students and teachers. So from a material, if you are an evaluator, you need to consider from the both perspectives, the students and teachers. So you need to know whether both of them are engaging to motivate, whether the material is motivating to engage or not. According to Rabji, three broad categories were introduced for the evaluation. First, the learner's needs, goals, and pedagogical requirements. We need to identify that. And then the teacher's skills, abilities, theories, and beliefs. So it need to match with the skills, abilities, theories, and beliefs. So if it doesn't have the scope of that, it doesn't match with the teacher's skills or abilities or theories or belief, it might fail. Lots of consequences, lots of challenges in a classroom. And the thinking underlying the materials writer's presentation of the content and approach to teaching and learning respectively. So from the both perspective, teaching and learning, it also will represent material writer's presentation, material writer's view, whenever you will evaluating the content and the approach as from the part of teaching and learning respectively. So you need to evaluate these things as well. So the overall evaluation from the overall section, so what are the things we need to evaluate? So what are the parameters, what are the variables we need to go through for evaluating a material? The usability factor, whether it is integrated or introduced in the syllabus as a core material or a supplementary material. So the way it is used or introduced in for the learners, it will have a large impact on that. The generalizability factor, whether is there a restricted use of core features which make the materials more generally useful. So if it is I mean um, of course there is a limit of generalizable factor. So if it is more generalized to use the to use in different contexts, as the learners can adapt it or and adopt it. So we need to look at that. We need to look at whether the material has this generalizability factor or not, whether it can be generalized or not. The adaptability factor, it is yes. I mean, and if whether it has the scope to add or extract or use in different contexts. If the context changes, if the teaching context changes, whether the teacher can add or extract or use it, he or she has the scope or not. We need to understand that. We need to know that whether the teachers can adapt the material or not. The flexibility factor, how rigid is the sequencing and grading? Can the materials be entered at different points or used in different ways? Yes, so whether uh, it can, how much flexible the material is. Um, I mean, if I want to introduce it in some point, in different point for the development or the for beneficiary of my learners, whether I can do that or not, whether that this flexibility uh, offered by the material or not. So we need to know that, we need to evaluate that. So these are the overall evaluation. And finally, in the conclusion, we can say that material evaluation is a time-consuming and difficult process. So lots of the variables in there, and you need to observe or evaluate a material from all the variables, from the perspective of all the variables. You need to go through all the variables and approaching it in the principle systematic and rigorous ways. So if you approach your evaluation and in a systematic way, rigorous way, it will help the evaluators. That means if we are evaluating the material, so from the part of the evaluators, it will evaluators to learn a lot about the material. So you will know a lot about the materials, about learning and teaching, and about themselves. So so lots of the things you will learn if you evaluate an ELT material. I also would like to add in this point that whenever I was studying this particular course, so I had a specific course named as Methods and Materials. and in that particular course I had to evaluate a particular material, whether it is uh, I mean whether it is suitable for the learners or not. I needed to evaluate that. I did that, and I know if you try to do that from any perspective, I mean from any class, if you just choose a class and try to evaluate that material from the perspective of uh, uh, that class. Of course, you need to know the other situations as well, the need of the learners, the teachers, the views of the material developer as well, the writer as well. So you need to um, evaluate lots of the issues as well. So these are the reference I used. So actually mainly I followed the materials and methods in ELT, a teacher's guide, which is developed by McDonough and Shaw and Shura. And of course I took help from different other sources. So if you have any question, please do ask or join in the forum to argue, to show your opinion. And in the last forum I talked about the adaptation. Okay, forget about that. Um, just join in the forum, just join the forum. It will be beneficiary for you to develop your marks as well. So thank you very much for being here, for the long time. You have been amazing. I should tell you that if you have reached here without skipping a second, without skipping a slide, you are amazing. You are amazing. You have done excellent, and I believe that you will be doing better in the task, in the activities which are going to come. Thank you all.